Welcome everyone to the Saphira Center of Shamanism, where we break down the ancient esoteric practices of shamanism and the occult, bringing them into balance with the deep psyche. My name is Luke, experienced practitioner and mentor of the shamanic and occult sciences. It is an honor to have you here. Thank you for joining me once again. Be sure to check out my membership programs. First two links within the description of this video if you have interest in working with me. First link for my premium membership service, the Saphira Shamanic School, ideal if you're wanting to work closely with me and gain access to potent initiatory webinars and workshops. Or check out the second link for my Patreon to gain access to potent exclusive content. Literally over 300 pieces of exclusive content relating to occultism and shamanism are available on this Patreon, with new content uploading multiple times each week. You will find full initiatory processes through the most advanced occult systems such as the Sephiroth, the Qliphoth, many other things as well. Gain access at just £20 per month. I look forward to seeing you there. Today we are going to be discussing the concept of reparenting and why it is the missing ingredient for success within all aspects of occult-based self-development, specifically occult initiation, but this is also relevant for all areas of self-development as well. Many are willing to do the outer layer of the work when it comes to observing their shadow, maybe even feeling their emotions and doing these different things that tick the box. But very few are willing to actually do the reparenting. And what reparenting basically means is the process of restructuring your reality to be a vessel for the opposite to what you experienced as a child. When I say the opposite, I'm talking about trauma. Reparenting is the process of allowing the inner child to feel safe in the world, embracing the multiplicity of self, and ultimately learning how to welcome the different aspects of yourself that you have learnt are not safe to feel and embody. Now, reparenting is the missing piece simply because many are guided towards different aspects of shadow work. Maybe they're guided towards occult-based work, and many do the outer layer of the work. But the core transformation takes place when you experience the opposite to what you experienced as a child within your day-to-day life. What I've seen it happen with myself, as well as seeing it happen with other types of people that I've worked with, is that it's easy enough to say, go to a mentoring session or do a healing session, go to therapy, or if you're really into occultism, then interacting with potent occult intelligences and technologies. It's very easy to do that. Anybody can do that. But where I've seen a lot of people fall short and not get the results that they want is simply through the fact that they are not in an environment that is actually supportive to their evolutionary process. In other words, we are doing this self-development work that is coaxing these repressed aspects to come to the surface, but our environment in terms of our day-to-day life is not actually supporting the ongoing evolutionary process. We have to have an environment that allows us to embody the fluidity in which this path is going to demand of us. That embodies the necessary fluidity that allows us to go through the dissolution of our old sense of self and ultimately be in an environment whereby our emotions are supported. We have people around us that are actually supporting our evolution by welcoming our emotions and ultimately meeting our needs. Now, why is reparenting such a difficult thing? Simply because we have learnt that unmet needs are normal. Okay, when our needs are not met as children, which falls under any aspect of us having an emotional need that was not met as a child, this gets normalized simply because we don't know any different. So we then build our sense of self based off of these unmet needs and then play out life in a way that re-traumatizes the inner child by default or completely severs the core trigger that is the key to our evolution. So this is exactly what we are going to be discussing today. We're going to be diving into the concept of reparenting, how this is linked to occult-based self-development, and ultimately how you can sustainably start the process of reparenting in your day-to-day life to ensure success within all aspects of your self-development and initiatory pursuits. This really is the missing ingredient to success within a lot of different types of practices and initiatory systems, particularly the darker aspects of the occult, such as demonolatry and qliphothic work. It is all about reparenting and learning how to meet the needs of our inner child. This is what the occult world would call the true will. So definitely stay tuned. So many people are attracted towards the concept of self-development, shadow integration, and evolution, but very few people actually realize what constitutes genuine success within these areas. You can do as many healing modalities as you want. You can go to as many healers as you want. From an occult perspective, you can invoke as many spirits as you want. You can embark on as many initiatory processes as you want. But what's really going to define how useful these things actually are for you is how willing you are to actually live your life and use your life as a vessel for transformation. The biggest mistake that I see people making within these different areas is perceiving the concept of self-development as separate from their day-to-day lives, when in reality your day-to-day lives are where the real work actually takes place. The real work takes place within your day-to-day lives. So it's very unlikely that emotions are going to come through to the surface when you, say, invoke a spirit, or if you go to a healing session or you're doing energy work. It's very unlikely that the emotions are going to come up in that moment. Emotions are triggered normally spontaneously within experiences and encounters that you have within your day-to-day life. What you need to do is learn how to discern within your day-to-day life what you are doing to separate yourself from true integration and what you are doing to actually be open and vulnerable. As vulnerability is always going to be the key, but vulnerability is always the harder option because it means actually opening yourself up and allowing your ego to be challenged. So it comes from welcoming daily life's challenges, welcoming experiences that are there to rupture an aspect of your sense of self so that you can remain challenged and remain growing. This is what evolution is all about. Evolution is about embarking on that continuous process of growth, constantly growing. You're never one person, you're never the same from one day to the next when you properly engage with your evolutionary path. And the only way to do this is by living your life, living your day-to-day life. Therefore, your evolution is not defined by how many modalities you've got under your belt, by how many spirits that you work with, but is defined on very much your ability to face your shit within your day-to-day life and allow yourself to be challenged, alongside allowing yourself to actually experience what your inner child actually wants to experience from life. And this is where many struggle, simply because experiencing what the inner child wants to experience often means opening yourself up to a new level of vulnerability that you have not experienced before. Now, when we are doing this, there are two things that can very easily end up happening. First and foremost, it is easy to open up to our inner child and welcome, through the work that we do, welcome our emotions, welcome our unmet needs, and bring them all up to the surface. But if we are in an environment that does not actually support that process, in other words, if we are still in relationships that are shutting us down, family dynamics that are built off of obligation instead of authenticity, you're still working in a job that you hate, then that is basically re-traumatizing the inner child. What you are doing is that you are welcoming these emotions, and then it's very easy to just go back into day-to-day life and then completely re-traumatize yourself in the process without realizing that the real transformation takes place within your day-to-day life, and your self-development is not a separate thing in any way whatsoever. So re-traumatization can definitely occur if the individual is not actually willing to make changes and is not actually willing to listen to their emotions and welcome their emotions, and is trying to separate themselves from vulnerability all the time. I've seen it happen where people embark on different types of initiatory processes. I've seen it happen a lot in the cliff off, where people start to open up different doorways within their psyche using these advanced occult technologies, and then they just re-traumatize themselves in their day-to-day lives simply because they are not actually willing to let go of the separation in which the process is training them and trying to provoke them into letting go of. So, re-traumatization very easily occurs if you are not actually willing to understand and make the effort to get to know your inner child and what your inner child actually wants from this life. Simply because our unmet needs have become so normalized because we don't know any different. Now, what constitutes an inner child's or the inner child's unmet needs? It's basically any time in your childhood that you experienced pain, and pain is experienced whenever you have a need that is not met. It can come through very simply by learning likes and dislikes, okay? By having something that you don't like or experiencing something that is unpleasant. This constitutes an unmet need, and all you have to do is look at where you have normalized the process of repressing emotions, normalized concepts such as your emotional needs don't matter, and different things like that. You can only imagine the amount of things that took place in your childhood whereby your emotional needs were not met, and that it was actually swept under the carpet, moved into a more covert space, and was basically hidden in dysfunctional behavior and classed as normal. So basically, we end up establishing a sense of self by default. Our identity layers are naturally built off of a foundation of pain and unmet needs, which means our identity layers are actually built to replicate that within our day-to-day life. But because it's so normalized, that it is actually what we perceive as safe. Let me give you an example. Somebody may have learnt within their early years that their sense of self is defined by how much they output, in other words, how much they work. Okay, so they are only going to then feel worthy if they have done a certain amount of work or a certain amount of things to be able to define their sense of self-value by. At which point, the identity layers are established around this pattern that then create the workaholic tendency, or the tendency to project all of your attention into one thing and aim towards a specific outcome that you think is going to define your sense of self. Another example is, say, if you never received substantial attention from your parents, then that creates wounds of ultimately feeling safe within environments whereby you are not seen, because that is simply the only foundation that is familiar to you. So these identity layers are established from these different layers of unmet needs that have taken place within childhood and ultimately been normalized. And then we end up building a life by default, which is then built off of that unprocessed pain. Now, when we start to get into esoteric-based practices, advanced path workings, let's say the Kabbalah, the Qliphoth, the Sephiroth, different types of technologies like that, what we're doing is that we are interacting with forces and technologies that are designed to basically rupture that identity. Okay, rupture the identity that has been built off of the unmet needs. But then what happens after that? What happens once that identity has been ruptured? We then have to make the effort to experience the opposite. Okay, we have to make the effort to experience the opposite to what informed that identity to be constructed in the first place. So an example of experiencing the opposite is say for example, going back to the example of the workaholic. The workaholic experiences the opposite by actually experiencing a dynamic whereby their needs are truly met by them receiving the recognition that they need without even doing anything in order to earn it. And think of somebody who has that pattern and how painful that is. Okay, if they have learned, oh, my sense of self, my value is built off of my output, and then all of a sudden, what gets mirrored back to them is, you know what, you are enough, you are amazing as you are. What is more dangerous to the individual? What is going to be more threatening to the ego? So it's here where we actually learn that we are safe within suffering and that we unconsciously bind ourselves to suffering, bind ourselves to the very things that we are telling ourselves that we want to exit and remove. But in reality, our actions suggest that we are very much comfortable within that place of suffering. And this is why reparenting is such a difficult thing to do, because of the normalization of those unmet needs. So reparenting comes from actually making the commitment to be present with the inner child, get to know the inner child, get to know the emotions, get to know the triggers, get to know what's actually underneath, so that you can start to reconstruct your reality into a vessel that actually supports a reality that your inner child is choosing. Whereas by default, we have not chosen our reality. Okay, the reality that we are living in now is often based, unless we choose and make the commitment to do something about it, the reality that we are living in by default is based off of the illusion of autonomy. Okay, we think that we're autonomous, but in reality, we're just responding to the same predefined paradigms that have been defined by a whole share of unmet needs that were not actually felt, processed, or even acknowledged as a child. So an example of an inner child's need is if, say, okay, you didn't get attention when you were a child, or you didn't actually get acknowledged for your achievements. That would then establish a paradox to that, okay? So think of what you experienced as a child, what needs were not met, and then think of what's the opposite, okay? How would the inner child's needs have actually been met? And it's by experiencing the opposite. So if you were never seen as a child, or never acknowledged for your efforts, never acknowledged for your unconditional talent, then experiencing the opposite is actually experiencing recognition. So therefore, you have to have an environment around you that is actually recognizing you. Okay, that's actually recognizing you unconditionally. Maybe you have a partner or a friendship group that is able to give you the recognition that your inner child needs. Now think of how shamed this very concept is. Okay, oh, like my need is to be recognized, and then we deem the need to be recognized as being a product of falsehood, when in reality it's a basic emotional need that has basically been completely rejected, and that rejection has been what? Normalized. So we have to understand what these basic emotional needs are, and normally they are very, very simple. Okay, things like recognition. If you were in a very unsafe environment as a child, then maybe reassurance. The inner child may need more reassurance than other people might do. Reassurance, understanding that it is safe, both from yourself and from those around you. So it's important to understand that we feel safe within the suffering itself. So let's use another example, going back to the example of the child that is never seen, or the child who grew up in an unsafe environment and didn't receive the reassurance that was needed. The identity layer is then going to be structured around that unmet need. That unmet need is going to be normalized, and then paradoxically, they are going to be attracted to what is safe, which means that they may be attracted towards relationship dynamics, for example, that are flaky, that are not actually co-creative at all, whereby there's no accountability, and basically they are unconsciously magnetizing the same mirrored experiences as to what they experienced as a child. And then we have to ask ourselves, what about the opposite? So what if we then move into a relationship dynamic that is the opposite? What if we then move into a friendship dynamic that is the opposite, whereby we do actually meet those needs? Then the ego feels threatened. Yeah, the ego feels threatened when a need of the inner child is met, because it has learnt that those needs are not met in day-to-day life. So if those needs are met, then by default, the ego is going to feel unsafe within that space. So if we are not willing to actually listen to the inner child and actually learn what these needs actually are, then it's very easy to re-traumatize ourselves in our day-to-day life. Okay, I've seen it happen so many times where people interact with different types of shamanic or occult technologies, or maybe people come for healing and mentoring sessions, and we identify all of these things, but then after the session's done, they just go back into their day-to-day life, whereby the relationship is the same, the environment is the same, and everything is literally the same. At which point, the work that we've just done might as well have just not even happened at all, because the environment doesn't even support the ongoing evolutionary process. Now, what is very important to differentiate here is many people think that they are experiencing the opposite to what they experienced as a child when they are separating themselves from the trigger. Now, this is very, very common. Okay, so what happens, say for example, if you have experienced ongoing disappointment, you've learnt that you cannot trust other people. Maybe you've had a severely abusive childhood where people were using your energy. Maybe you were violated in different ways, emotionally, physically, all of these different things. What does this create? This creates the belief that, oh, this is how relationship dynamics actually are. This is how maybe people actually are. So then the ego constructs a specific reality whereby it doesn't experience any of that at all, and then frames that as healing. But in reality, it's stagnancy, because they're not experiencing the opposite. Okay, so what many people do end up doing is, say if they experience the same patterns in relationship dynamics, or they have learned that they cannot trust people from their early years trauma, what they often do is that they learn to feel safe within separation or within solitude, because they have learned that they cannot trust other people. When in reality, that's not actually getting rid of the problem. What you're then doing is that you're cutting off the primary trigger, separating yourself from it, and then, oh, life is easy because I'm not, like, people aren't bringing me shit anymore. But then that stagnancy, because you're not actually experiencing the opposite, okay? And growth only happens when the reparenting process takes place. And the reparenting process happens how? By understanding what needs were not met and actually tailoring our reality to be able to effectively meet those emotional needs. Now, in the occult context, this is the same as the true will, okay? And this is where it really links into self-development and the inner child. The needs of the inner child are your true will, okay? The needs that were not met as a child are your true will. At which point, living your true will in the occult context, or embarking on an initiatory process that is there to help you merge with your true will, living that true will in the occult context is about learning how to merge with your inner child. It is the same thing. So In the occult world or shamanic world, sometimes we view the true will as something that we get separated from when we come into this physical body, and then we go through different experiences, trauma fragmentation, societal programming, that cause us to then become distant from what our soul actually wants. And then the identity structures are built to carry out a reality that we feel safe in, but is actually extremely re-traumatizing. What we have to look at there is that it's exactly the same as the inner child. Okay, what we are born with in terms of the qualities, in terms of the enthusiasm that we are born with naturally, is the true will of the soul. But we opt in to that separation process. And when we go through experiences in our early years that are there specifically to separate us from our essence so that we can later make the commitment to journey back to integration and journey back to unity, we have to understand that in order to journey back to unity, we have to embrace the multiplicity of self. We have to understand what unity actually means. If we are to attain unity externally, then we are needing to unify our inner child, okay? Merge with the inner child, understand what those deep emotional needs really are. Now you can see, okay, be honest with yourself. If you engage in occult practices, if you engage in self-development, if you go to healing sessions, go to therapy, okay, is your daily life actually structured in a way that is going to support you experiencing the opposite to what you did as a child? Is your environment actually structured in a way that is actually going to cater for the emotional needs of the inner child? In the majority of cases, it will be a no. Okay, because very few people are genuinely aware of this. And when I say experiencing the opposite, again, I do not mean separating yourself from the trigger. I do not mean living a life of separation whereby you've cut other people off and then you only keep people, or you only let people in at arm's length. That is not evolution. Okay, that is stagnancy because you are not allowing your ego to be challenged. Okay, and when the ego is challenged, understand that it's not the inner child that is being challenged. It is your separation that's being challenged. Okay, and when your ego is challenged, you're basically allowing the world around you to be the necessary trigger point of a necessary rupture that is required to bring you back into contact with the most exiled aspects of yourself. And this is exactly what different aspects of occult processes are designed to do, such as the cliff off, is that you're literally opening up these identity layers, dissolving them entirely. And then what happens if you can't meet your emotional needs? Okay, what happens if you don't actually see these initiatory processes as a reparenting process? Then it fuels separation, it fuels fragmentation, delusion starts, and all of these different things. It happens all the time because there is no known connection between the needs of the inner child, between the concept of reparenting and occult based practice and initiation. Okay, occult is exploring what's hidden, and what really is hidden within yourself are your different emotional needs. Okay, and real evolution takes place when we are making the commitment to reconstruct reality and experience the opposite. Okay, it's so easy to just go into day-to-day life and then just leave the healing work, leave the integration work to one side, and then life just gets in the way. And then it becomes the type of thing, oh, I'm just going to do this when I have time. Oh, if I have time, I'll do a bit of shadow work today. Oh, I've got a bit of spare money, so I'll book in with a healer for a few sessions. And all of these things is not the key to evolution because you are trying to separate yourself from the world. You're trying to separate yourself from what the world is actually for, and that is to act as an archetype for your evolution, to act as a vessel for transformation. And when we are actually facing reality as that necessary vessel, then we move into a space of natural integration as long as we are able to discern. Now, how do we discern? How do we make sure that our environment is actually working at our evolutionary potential? And how do we ensure that we are not fueling our separation unconsciously and staying within a space of comfort. Very, very simple. I've spoken about it in previous videos, but the best way to discern whether something is for your evolutionary best interest is quite simple. Am I experiencing the opposite to what I did as a child? In other words, am I in an environment whereby my emotional needs are being heard? Am I in an environment whereby I am able to speak up and not be completely shamed for it? Do I have that capacity within my day-to-day life? If so, then that is evolution. Okay, if so, then that is genuine evolution and individuation, because you are seeing the world around you as that vessel and you are coming into contact with the opposite. Okay, then we have to ask ourselves, are we separating ourselves? Okay, are we staying in a reality that feels comfortable, but in reality is not actually helping us grow? Are we staying in a reality whereby we are trying to project the problem outside of ourselves, whereby we are trying to see ourselves as entirely separate from the entirety of the world around us, at which point that is not evolution, that is stagnation? Okay, how you discern a given situation, whether it is actually helping your evolution or whether it's re-traumatizing you, is, am I experiencing the opposite, or am I experiencing the same perpetual crap as I did when I was a child? If you're experiencing the same perpetual crap, then it's not evolution. This is the thing. If you're experiencing the opposite, then it is evolution. Now, when people embark on these types of processes, particularly occult-based processes and initiation, there is a restructuring of reality that has to take place first. Okay, a restructuring of reality that has to take place that will happen naturally, but you do often have to take action on the opportunities that actually come in. Okay, because when you first start to actually deconstruct a reality that is built off of fragmentation and on re-traumatization, then you're going to be challenged through means of, you may encounter resistance, okay? Because genuine resistance comes in when you are actually being open and vulnerable, because the ego doesn't feel safe within that state, okay? This whole new age nonsense about following the path of least resistance and how the path that is actually right is not actually supposed to be difficult or challenging at all. Ignore that. It's blatant spiritual bypassing. When you are doing what your ego does not feel safe to do, there is going to be resistance and there are going to be challenges on that path. And we have to discern those challenges, okay? Maybe we'll start changing all of a sudden and the people around us will have to get used to that change. Either they will evolve with us or they will fall away, okay? The people around us will have to adjust to that. And this is where people normally struggle, because they get onto these processes and they know that their reality has to change and they're receiving openings for reality changing and the possibility of reality changing, but they are still holding on to the same partner, they're still holding on to the same job, they're still holding on to their pre-constructed reality that has been built off of a trauma fragmentation, that has been built off of a share of unmet needs because it's what's safe. And then that's when re-traumatization happens, because they're doing work, stepping onto evolutionary processes that are bringing up their repressed parts and needs, and then they're going into day-to-day life and completely shutting those needs down because they don't want to deal with what actually comes up. So what type of initiate are you going to be? Let's ask the very simple question, what type of initiate are you going to be? Okay, are you going to commit to your evolutionary process? Are you going to commit to allowing your ego to be challenged, allowing yourself to enter situations that shatter the illusion of separation and help you to see the world around you as the vessel of transformation? Are you going to listen within, understand what your inner child's needs were, understand where your needs were not met, and are you going to tailor your reality to meet the needs of your inner child. If so, then you will be successful on this path. It doesn't matter what process you start. You could go into the Qliphoth, go into the Stellar Outlands, the Tunnels of Set, advanced, the darkest occult technologies that are there to destabilize the most dense illusions of reality. You could go into all of them, be absolutely fine, use all of them to your advantage if you are willing to reparent your inner child. But if you are not willing to reparent your inner child, then the more stuff that you expose yourself to, the more dark matter that you expose yourself to, the more self-development that you expose yourself to, the harder it's going to be on the body because you are not willing to do the work within day-to-day life. It's very similar to the concept if you're familiar with plant medicine and ayahuasca, okay, and the whole integration process that takes place after that. Okay, understand there that when you drink the ayahuasca is only the transmission. Okay, ayahuasca is only the transmission, or the psychedelic, the plant medicine's only the transmission. Okay, the important part is then in day-to-day life. Okay, the archetypes that come at you in day-to-day life, how willing you are to actually learn what your emotional needs really are. Okay, this is how you integrate. This is how you integrate the deepest and most challenging spiritual experiences. How you integrate the most dense trauma is not by perpetuating in the same stuff, but is by actually committing to tailoring your life for your inner child. As that is what this work is really all about. So I think that is everything that I need to discuss in today's video. Absolutely essential topic to get your head around, but I think that is everything that I needed to discuss for today. Be sure to check out my membership programs, first two links within the description of this video. Hit like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.